So today we're going to be looking at 1 Samuel chapters 1 through 3. And so I'll just give you guys a minute to read that. And I'm actually going to be talking more about chapters 1 and 2 than anything else. I actually won't even really get to chapter 3. I encourage you to read it anyways, but if you really just want to do chapters 1 and 2, that's fine. And I think something I need to mention beforehand, just to kind of get ourselves thinking correctly on this topic, is that our culture, and all cultures in general, right, every single nation, every single culture has incorrect messages that it teaches that actually get in the way of us understanding God correctly and understanding the gospel correctly. And I think some of those cultural messages related to this topic are kind of like the notions and the messages related to what we deserve as people, right? A lot of people will say, and without thinking, just like, oh, I deserve a good life. Oh, I deserve this. I deserve that. I deserve like the skills that I have. I've worked hard for them. Or I deserve a good life. I deserve good things to happen to me, or this loving family, or this good relationship, or this amazing experience or opportunity. I deserve those things. Of course, it's like second nature. This gets in very much the way of how we approach God, because if we as people feel like we're entitled to everything that we have, or feel like we're entitled to things that we don't have, we approach God and we ask him, God, what the heck? This isn't part of the deal. You're not holding up your end of the deal. You know, you owe me. I'm such a good person. Don't you remember that? I'm such a wise person. I think you could learn a lot from me. You owe me something. And it gets in the way of our prayer life, and it really messes with our understanding of who God is and who we are. And we'll get to this a little bit more, but if we understand the gospel correctly, the gospel does say we deserve something, but we deserve a lot of this, and it's actually judgment. We deserve judgment and death and shame and God's wrath. And so it's not all these good things, right? Because the American cultural message will be, you deserve all these good things, but you don't deserve these bad things. No. You don't deserve those bad things at all. But the gospel says the opposite. You actually deserve all of these terrible things that you've caused yourself because of the sin in your life and what you've done. And yet you've been given life. You've been given freedom. You deserve death. You've been given life. It flies in the face of the cultural message of today. And if we accept the culture's message, it's very difficult to understand this, and it's very difficult to approach God well. And so in this passage, I'm going to focus on Hannah's request and Hannah's response. It's in Hannah's request, it's very apparent that she has a clear understanding of the nature of God. If you look at chapter 2 and her praise of God and her prayer to God, it's very clear, and we'll get to this more in her response, that she understands that God is a God who is powerful, who's in control of everything, in control of the very laws of nature, you know. And she's also aware that God gives good gifts and delights in giving good gifts to those who humbly serve and follow him. He humbles the proud, and he exalts the humble. And this is probably not the first time she's asked God for a son, right? And I think this is something that Christians often have a problem with. They're like, well, God likes to give good gifts. Like why am I not getting this? You know, what's going on here? You know, Hannah existed in a culture very different from ours. Whereas today it's very difficult for couples that can't have kids. It's a tough thing, but there's not like a cultural stigma of like, what's wrong with you? Like you're a terrible person. You're just a shame of a person. But in Hannah's culture, if she was a woman that was barren and couldn't have children, she would have actually been publicly shamed. And in this passage, it says that her husband's other wife would actually make fun of her, would chide her, mess with her. This was a subject of deep pain and misery and shame to her, you know. And she had requested of this probably to God hundreds of times. I'm guessing. It doesn't say that in the passage, but I just imagine that given the importance of this topic, that she would have requested this many times, and yet God didn't hear her prayers. And I think something that is very clear in her response is that it says she was weeping bitterly, but she wasn't bitter towards God, right? She didn't have this kind of chip on her shoulder approaching God saying, you owe me a son. What the heck? You know, you gave everybody else a son. What about me? You owe me. She never ever appealed to that, she actually shows quite the opposite, actually just an anguish, this humbleness of God, I don't deserve anything. I have nothing to offer you. Lord, I just desperately want a son. If you remember me, Lord, I desperately want a son. And I think that's very key to us to understand that God doesn't owe us anything. And even if we pray for the same thing hundreds of times and it doesn't happen, it doesn't mean that God doesn't love us. It doesn't mean that God is evil or anything like that. God doesn't deserve, we don't deserve anything for God, and he owes us nothing. And she understands that and makes a very humble request. She also does something I don't know if I'd recommend to you guys. She makes an oath to the Lord. She vows that if she's given a son, that she'll actually give this son right back to God, that she would actually devote her son to a life of ministry, living in the house of the Lord under the counsel of Eli, the high priest of that time. So it's a big oath, basically saying, God, this is the thing I desperately want more than anything else in the world, and once I get it, I'm going to give it right back to you, and I'm never going to see my son except for like once a year. It's a pretty crazy vow, and I wouldn't suggest that you make vows to God like this. To her credit, she responds well, and then it gets into Hannah's response, right? Giving her son away, that's the first response, and that's an act of incredible righteousness and consistency and honor, saying, I promised this to you, God, you've given me this, and so I will be good to my word, and I will give my son back to you. And so she gives her son away to God, to the like ministry of God, and she gets to see him every so often, but this must have been incredibly difficult for her. Again, like there's no promise that she's going to have any more kids. We find out later in the passage she actually gets more kids. But again, the passage actually says, and the Lord was gracious to Hannah, and she gave birth to 3 sons and 2 daughters. It was through the Lord's grace that Hannah was given children. It wasn't through any merit of Hannah. Hannah didn't deserve to have any more children. That's the key here, and Hannah recognizes this, and this is key for us to recognize that when God gives good gifts, we don't deserve them. It's by His grace alone. But anyways, so she fulfills her promise. She gives her son away, and in response to this, she worships God. I would imagine myself kind of a little bitter, like, God, you can't believe you made me do that. I made that vow. I was really emotional. I didn't actually mean what I said. It wasn't really a promise. Like, I didn't want to do it. That's something I would do, in response to that. But she praises God and rejoices God. And like I was saying, and it's just this beautiful passage on just how great God is, how powerful God is. And I think something that's happening in Hannah here is she's just incredibly enamored by the nature of God, just God in Him of Himself. Just that she talks about, she says, do not keep talking so proudly, for the Lord is a God who knows, and by His deeds are weighed. The Lord brings death and makes alive. He brings down to the grave and raises up. The Lord sends poverty and wealth. He humbles and He exalts. He raises the poor from the dust. Right? So she's saying God is in control of everything. God is all powerful. God is on a different playing field than any of us. Right? If you're proud, He's going to humble you. If you're humble, He's going to exalt you. And this theme is throughout the Bible, that God often humbles the proud and exalts the weary. And she's just completely enamored by who God is, and just amazed. Wow, that God heard my prayer. That God responded to my deepest desire. Right? And the natural response in her heart is to just have deep rejoicing to who God is. So I ask you, in response to Hannah's response, do we do this? Do we look at the blessings that God has given us in our life and just rejoice over them, saying, God, you are incredible. What you've done in the world is insane. Who you are, your very nature, just blows me away. And that you, being on this playing field that is so much higher than me, that you would listen to my prayers, that you would love me, that you would redeem me, that you would restore me and call me a son, call me a daughter. Like, are we blown away by that fact? Or do we still feel entitled? Do we still go around just bitter about the better lives that everybody else seems to be living, going through social media, all the better looking or better, more fun people having better lives than us? Are we just bitter about these things, or do we rejoice for what God has given us? When when we hear the gospel, are we like, I know, I get this already, I've heard it a million times, or are we just blown away every single time that we hear that the gospel is that we deserve death, and yet God sent his son to die the death that we deserve so that we can have a right relationship with God? Does that blow us away? That a God of that level, again, on a different playing field than us, would stoop so low, and it would cost him so much, just so that we could be called sons and daughters. I don't know.